Good evening, class, and please take your seats, as by popular request of the student body, we are going to revisit an old and cherished friend just in time for the holidays. My earlier description of this popular platform was certainly more succinct, non-serious in tone, and indeed very much limited by the resources I possessed at that time. And thanks to your continued support, I feel I would be remiss if I did not look back and offer one last take for the sake of history. So tonight, we dive deep to discuss the glorious nonsense that is the Urbanmech. The road to the Urbanmech involves the death of two Camerons, the decisions of a third, and ultimately the influence of an Amaris, which results in an era marked by distrust, dysfunction, and even limited disarmament. When Nicholas Cameron died at the age of 93, he left a Star League considered by many to be at the height of its golden years. His reign had been indeed mostly wise and marked by many technological and scientific advancements which shaped the inner sphere for centuries. By the end of his stewardship, the Star League had a unified currency, a functional HPG network, and thanks to technical marvels like the Jamerson-Ulikov water purification system and his further insistence it not be a controlled technology, the inner sphere would settle an additional 1,000 worlds before the year 2700. Upon Nicholas Cameron's death at the age of 93, his chosen heir would be his grandson, Michael Cameron, who was barely 27 at the time. The transfer of power from a wise and benevolent ruler to such an unproven one marks the beginning of earnest trouble for the Star League, and to fully understand why, we must address the generational gap of rulership in the Cameron line. Michael Cameron's father was Joseph Cameron II, who, despite a promising upbringing, was a deeply flawed man, so embroiled in controversy that he was denied his right to rule the dynasty. The historical record paints him as a vain, devious, and deceptive man, all the while projecting the mask of a suave and courteous military officer. This mask protected him for a time, as despite multiple scandals, he actually ascended the ranks of the SLDF, making colonel by his 29th birthday, and earning the command of an entire royal regiment. He even managed to convince his father, the already legendary Nicholas Cameron, that he was worthy enough to be the Director General of the Terran hegemony. But it was not enough for Joseph Cameron, who indeed desired more. In 2641, allegations of bribery and kickbacks in order to secure lucrative government contracts surfaced, which Joseph publicly denied. It was the sudden death of an investigative reporter, one who held potentially damning evidence regarding his case, that finally ended his political aspirations. As a result of this controversy, Nicholas Cameron stripped Joseph of his many titles, and then quietly reactivated his commission in the regular army before discreetly shipping him off to a wargame planning commission. And there, during a routine training exercise, an accident killed Joseph Cameron, which was for him quite fortunate, as the mountain of damning evidence produced during the investigation was likely leading to his inevitable arrest. While some had initially considered the Cameron dynasty as a godsend for humanity, with Nicholas Cameron's reign elevating the Star League and all under its care, the failings of Joseph Cameron II and his downfall marks the turning point of what many feel are the final good years of the Star League, And with a new and untested Michael Cameron on the throne, things seemed perilously uncertain. And then there was an Amaris to worry about. Specifically Tadeo Amaris, leader of the Rimworld Star League territorial state, who was decidedly expanding his personal army for surely personal reasons. This was materially fueled by the Draconis Combine, who felt that the succession of a new and unproven First Lord was just the time to begin tipping the scales of power. And so tested, Michael Cameron made his will fully known by issuing Directive 30 shortly thereafter, or as it would be called in time, the Council Edict of 2650. This edict enforced an immediate limitation on the arms allowed to each and every member state of the Star League. The reason for this was plain, as the Star League could ill afford another reunification war. In short, peace was in everyone's interest. And for a time, it seemed that most states intended to comply by slowly dismantling their vast battlemech forces to instead quietly strengthen their militias and reserves, waiting for perhaps another opportunity to test the resolve of the Cameron dynasty. It is against this backdrop of very uncertain times, distrust, and disarmament that the humble Urbanmech was born. With a high-pressure atmosphere, higher than standard Terran gravity, and an abundance of radioactive material, Marcus was a world principally operated as an industrial site for the Terran hegemony, and Orgus Industries was a manufacturer who had made Marcus their home. In most cases, a successful mech manufacturer begins with individual systems components or battlemech parts, before then moving on to design something like an entire battlemech from the ground up. Orgus, which had zero battlemech experience prior to the Urbi, instead went all in from the very beginning. And stranger still, they would build nothing but the Urbanmech and parts for it, seemingly content to never diversify their portfolio. Thus, Orgus is an anomaly among Inner-Sphere mech manufacturers, and joins Wellstech as one of those least likely to succeed. For the Urbanmech was not engineered to be a peerless product, but rather simple in purpose and incredibly cheap, in order to better serve the demands of a peacetime military, now in an uncertain phase of disarmament. Their design began with an easily mass-manufactured chassis and incorporated inexpensive and uncomplex components which they had mostly licensed. The armor is 6 tons of Duralex, which, while not advanced, is plenty for a light battlemech. They gave it an incredibly modest but reliable Linux 60 engine, which makes the Urbanmech the slowest light mech in existence, with a redline top speed of only 32.4 kph. However, the Urbanmech is not your typical battlemech, as it is by namesake a city fighter, where height and positioning advantages mean more than speed. So they installed a pair of pit-band jump jets in order to enhance its mobility. Built for the tight confines of a city fight, the exterior of the Urbanmech is designed to minimize its profile, with arms barely large enough to house the weapons it carries, an AC-10, and a single small laser. The Urbanmech design can rotate its upper torso a full 360 degrees, which is an enormous benefit in close quarters battle, as it does not need to turn in order to engage a target. And so built, the Urbanmech is designed to hit and fade within a city, where rapid maneuvering is inadvisable, if not factually impossible. At 1.4 million C-bills on the common market, this mech has always been extremely affordable, and has since served as a useful comparative tool for mech pricing indexes. While widely dismissed by many in the world of military affairs, the Urbanmech is an efficient killer in its native environment. An Urbanmech lance in a city fight will split their forces and then coordinate successive relentless attacks in order to ambush opponents from multiple pre-planned vantage points. Once the invaders begin to push back, the Urbies will then bound away on jump jets, retreating to secondary ambush points in order to keep the party going. Properly utilized and supported, an Urbanmech is more than capable of stopping vast forces, or at least tying them up until reinforcements arrive. During the twilight years of the Star League, the Urbanmech was used as a measure of control to suppress riots and insurrection movements, as it had enough armor and firepower to hold its own in these limited theaters of engagement. However, it is of note that as the Star League fell, some of the very last offenders to resist against Samaris's onslaught and the subsequent collapse of the state were frequently isolated Urbanmech units, bravely attempting to hold while the world burned around them. As the Amaris Civil War ended, surviving Star League Urbanmechs then passed into the stockpiles of the successor states, who, while frequently desperate for mechs, often dismissed the little Urbie as nothing more than a battlefield liability. To most at that time, the Urbanmech stood as a reminder of a stagnant and serenely unaware Star League now collapsed under the horrific weight of its own hubris. As such, many inherited second-hand Urbanmechs were indeed scrapped for parts, or left to rot in boneyards as more desirable Star League-era designs were prioritized for immediate warfighting use. But beggars can't be choosers, and desperate for operational battle mechs of any description, the Capellan Confederation put their Urbanmechs on the front lines until better material was available. While many other forces did eventually by desperate requirements send the Urbanmech to war, the CCAF's reliance on the platform, and through their dedicated support of it, ensured the Urbie not only survived the succession wars, but soon enough began to appear in the historical record as a notable battle mech. In 2862, Merrick's 4th Regulan Hussars raided Carver 5, trying to grab a reported stash of Atlas and Victor parts supposedly stockpiled there. Defending the planet was a single battalion of Lothar's Fusiliers, a regiment of the somewhat famous Chesterton Reserves. Supported by armor, artillery, and infantry, the Urbanmechs of Lothar's Fusiliers engaged the Merrick forces with pop-up fire, before fading back into the city for cover. Repeated Urbanmech ambushes bogged the Merrick forces down, and soon enough, they began to lose their inertia. The Merrick forces then had to commit a marauder company in order to take the city. While the Urbanmechs did not win that fight, they greatly slowed the invaders down, and as a result, Merrick forces made off with perilously little, as reinforcements soon arrived to chase them off. But to better separate fact from fiction about the humble Urbanmech, let us examine what makes it work. The UMR-60 is the base model Urbanmech. It has an AC-10, 11 heatsinks, a tiny engine, 6 tons of armor, 2 jump jets, and a small laser. All core components are simple and possess modest maintenance requirements. The base model is a 30-ton platform which is surprisingly easy to modify, and thus leads to a number of interesting variations. It has enough ammunition for about 2 minutes of rock and roll, which is a generous way of saying the company never intended for this thing to go to war, let alone survive 4 nuclear ones. The UMR-27 is an Urbanmech variant using the basis of the UMR-60, but changes things up. By dropping a heatsink in the base model weapons, this model has instead 3 SRM-6s supplanted by actuator enhancements for additional accuracy potential. It also has case protection for the ammunition and allows for the Urbanmech to serve as a point-blank missile plow. The UMR-60L is an interesting take on the Urbanmech, which transforms the little Urby into a giant killer. It strips 2 tons of armor and replaces the AC-10 with an AC-20. With very limited ammunition, this Urbanmech is a point-blank surprise party, which waits for larger mechs and then introduces them to the ground. If it survives, that is. The UMR-63 is a reasonable upgrade kit for the Capellan Confederation's many fielded Urbanmechs. It replaces the signature AC-10 with an LBX version for shotgunning the entire street, and then adds a small pulse laser to mop up remaining infantry. This upgrade is saner than most, as it improves the Urbanmech's capabilities without sacrificing performance or even survivability. The UMR-68 is a Draconis Combine take on the Urbanmech, which does away with the trademark autocannon and instead replaces it with an MRM-30. This model still keeps the 2 small lasers of the R-63, as the MRM-30 is unsuited to dispatching occasional infantry without destroying the entire city block in the process. The R-68 was predominantly fielded during the Combine Dominion War, and while the war was largely a stalemate, the UMR-68 served throughout and was very frequently a nasty surprise for the many clanners who thought the little liability had no teeth. The UMR-69 upgrades the autocannon to an ultra autocannon and the small laser to an extended range one. It also featured ferrofibrous armor and 5 whole tons of it at the cost of a single heatsink. This Urbanmech is a damn fine upgrade of the base model, but it eats through ammunition at a much faster rate and therefore suffers from combat endurance issues. For this reason alone, it is not very popular. The UMR-70 is a Fed Sons upgrade, centered around the autocannon. Then again, it's House Davion, so that was always expected. The R-70 has ferrofibrous armor like the R-69, but replaces the AC-10 with the rotary autocannon 5, which then has 2 tons of ammunition, which is nowhere near enough to feed a rotary autocannon. The RAC-5 allows the little Urby to shoot a great many things in a very brief period of time, until the autocannon jams or it inevitably clicks empty. But in that case, it also carries an ER medium laser, in addition to the standard small laser, as reliable backup options. The UMR-80 is a recent development carrying a snub-nose PPC, a small pulse laser, tag, and a Beagle active probe, while still retaining the original version's small laser. It has improved jump jets and is established as a highly advanced, short-range urban warfare platform well-suited to hunting down enemy strike teams. With a fully dedicated ECM suite, good luck hitting it as it ducks between alleyways on its way to finding your kneecaps. The UMR-90 is called the Suburban Mech and was created by none other than Hans Davion himself, who decided to do away with the autocannon and gave the Urbanmech a larger engine, so this Urbanmech can bumble along at 54 kph. It is armed with a single PPC backed up by 2 medium lasers. However, it only has 13 heat sinks and thus does run very hot. The UMA-4 is the single craziest version of the Urbanmech. It crams an Aero 4 artillery platform and an ER medium laser into the 30-ton frame by replacing the internals with endo steel and then squeezing the cockpit into whatever space remains. While it carries only 10 rounds of ammunition, this Urbanmech is still incredibly lethal and is provenly capable of deploying nuclear Aero 4 missiles. This Urbanmech can quickly escalate a limited engagement into a theater-wide problem. For cry havoc and let slip the Aero 4. These are just a few models of note in historical production, and many more one-off variants of the machine still haunt battlefields to this day, incorporating any number of bizarre design choices and unholy weapon loadouts. Despite military leaders continually regarding the Urby as nothing more than a liability, people do indeed love this thing. And stranger still, that love is not limited to the inner sphere, as there is a clan version. During the clan's own golden century, Clan Coyote worked their space magic in order to develop Omni technology, leading to a number of mech designs which could be rapidly reconfigured into numerous deadly variations of a theme. In their research, they ardently pored over centuries of battle data as far back as the American Civil War, in order to seek guidance on the best path forward. In their extensive study of historical designs, they happened upon the Urbanmech and, seemingly inspired by it, immediately went to work. The Urbanmech 2C serves in the same role as its inner sphere cousin, though it boasts many upgrades. It can amble up to 54 kph, and it carries an Ultra Autocannon 10 and an ER small laser. The targeting and tracking systems are clan tech and thus very good, but the rest of the machine is largely unchanged from the original design. Clan Coyote again, the inventors of Omnitech, field the largest numbers of the Urbanmech 2C, and the mech is also operated by clans Snow Raven, Ice Hellion, Hell's Horses, and Goliath Scorpion. With all of the choices available to them in advanced firepower and technology, it is curious that they too venerate the Urbanmech. To understand why, we must examine what we know of its combat history among them. When the Urbanmech 2C was new, as is the Clanner way, it faced trial by combat. Clan Burrock had attempted to raid Clan Coyote on Tamaron, and while certainly surprised, the 18th Assault Cluster of Coyote's Lambda Galaxy challenged the Burrock raiding party to honorable combat. Driven by competent pilots and operating in its native environment, a city, the Urbanmech 2C turned the tide versus the raiding party, who left in a damn hurry, likely confused as to what the hell just happened. And naturally, once word got out, many clanners began desiring the Urbanmech 2C for themselves. And so, even among Kerensky's descendants, the Urbanmech is a modest legend. As for the greater historical impact of the Urbanmech, we must now examine those brave few who made it work so very well. Gordon Stewart served with the Lothar Fusiliers as part of the sometimes effective Chesterton Reserves, which during the closing phases of the Third Succession War saw intense combat along the border with House Davion. Stewart is an interesting specimen of the Capellan Pilot Corps, as while utterly loyal and devoted to the Capellan state, he repeatedly refused promotions in order to remain with his lance, which was dedicated to urban defense and naturally piloted the Urbanmech. While a small cog in the overall affairs of the Capellan military, Gordon was a notable person, as unlike many in his place, he frequently and openly spoke his mind. He didn't trust the Curetans, and when the Capellan state deemed them an ally, he upset his chain of command by continuing to openly preach his contempt for the dragon. For the sin of having too much to think, his commanders decided to assign his unit to flashpoints along the Free Worlds League border in order to dramatically shorten his career. And despite this, Stewart and his Urbanmech survived. Stewart's mindset proved to be nearly prophetic, as the Draconis Combine did not arrive to help the Confederation during the opening phases of the Fourth Succession War, where the Federated Sons took a chunk out of the Capellan state. Bitter but unbroken, Stewart and many of his fellow Urbanmech pilots left the Confederation and then joined the First Republican Guards of the Tikhonov Free Republic. For as long as that lasted anyways. Ringo Peterson was a periphery mech jockey who won his Urbanmech in a poker game. Leaving Tortuga in 3060, he embarked on a career of madness and banditry. His actions on Randall's Regret, an agricultural world located somewhere between Herotitus and Tortuga, was described as a one-man campaign of terror, though likely a very slow one. With loot from the planet secured, he began to upgrade the aging Urbanmech, and in 3071, he somehow pulled off the legendary Hunar bank heist, which is something the Federated Sons are still trying to figure out. Disappearing soon after, Ringo's name alone provokes fear and dread, not only of the man, but of the machine he rode to infamy. Patricia Wellesley was an eccentric, known for collecting teapots and possessing a terrifying knack for urban warfare tactics. As such, she was a competent battlefield commander in the urban defense forces of the St. Ives Armored Cav, and a notable Urbanmech pilot. Her defense of New Colas against the Federated Sons was so successful and is still taught today as an Academy textbook example of urban defense operations, and her grandson Paul Wellesley followed in her footsteps, becoming on his own a celebrated member of the St. Ives Armored Cavalry and exceeding his grandmother's legendary combat record. And amusingly enough, he did so from the cockpit of his grandmother's Urbanmech. The Urbanmech has a bad case of imposter syndrome, though to be fair, it is one derived from and applied by outsiders trying to deride, demean, and ultimately slander the humble machine. Those who detract from the Urbi will dismiss it as nothing more than a crippling battlefield liability, barely capable of approaching problems at the speed of smell. And yet, most Urbanmech pilots cannot hear this criticism, for they know it as a mech absolutely capable of killing giants and turning the tide of battle. Die-hard Urbanmech pilots love their machine, as it is to them the little mech that could, or as they frequently put it, it's the trash can, not the trash can't. And so elevated by the eternal gratitude of its own pilot corps, the humble Urbi has become a near-permanent mascot of our profession, representing a can-do attitude in the face of extreme danger. Regardless of what you may think of it, the Urbanmech has a following that transcends the test of time. It is so popular that it has its own cocktail, and its own sport, the Urbi Derby. Yes, it may indeed be a simple battle mech by modern standards, but the Urbanmech is never obsolete, as it is an ever-evolving, ever-growing legend of its own making. And while not quite yet a masterpiece, it is a reminder that the humblest of things are indeed quite capable, and should never be forgotten. Class dismissed. Thanks to the artists who answered the call to help get this project done for the holidays on a limited budget, tight timelines, and under relative secrecy. Thanks to their multitude of awesome talents in being able to bring the machine to life and to illustrate it is more than a joke and is, as always, a celebrated meme. Lastly, thanks to the audience who made this possible. And as always, take care of each other. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go officiate our annual Urbi Derby. You can hear the train. Here comes the train. God damn it.